been said that one of the most interesting challenges offered to a screenwriter is the task of having to write about a famous writer. Writing is hard to visualize because it's such a solitary activity that, unlike painting or sculpting or even filmmaking, it has nothing for the eyes. One of the most successful attempts to visualize the works of a famous author was The Life of Emile Zola, the 10th film to win the Oscar for Best Picture and, among these first films to take the top prize, one of the most engaging. It tells the story of the famous 19th century French author and intellectual who saw the injustice and inhumanity in his native France and tried to turn it into a series of books that were devoured by the public but decried by the country's government as subversive and inflammatory. Such actions, the movie argued, are necessary to the security of the idea of democracy, that the public must be able to speak and to think and to express exasperation at a government that treats them like children and asks for unquestioned faith and allegiance. This was an important statement in 1937, as the film's populist ideals played hard against the growing terror visited on the nations of Europe at the hands of Adolf Hitler, now wielding absolute power in Germany. Played against Hitler's growing threat, The Life of Emile Zola would itself become stunted by Hollywood executives too weak to stand up to him, responding to this delusional egomaniac with the force and tenacity of a bowl of runny applesauce. Hello and welcome to the Best Picture winners, a full-on survey of the films Oscar crowned the best of the year. My name's Jerry, and I'll be looking at each film from each year of the Academy's first century, and the people and events surrounding it. This time we're looking at The Life of Emile Zola, the story of life, liberty, and vive la France. In general, people don't like to be told what to do. One of the strange contradictions of human society is that we'd all like to do as we please, but we have an understanding that building a civilization requires boundaries and structure, a controlled definition of freedom within a parameter that allows us to live together in a measure of harmony. The balance of freedom between an anarchist state and a police state is vitally important to secure the common tranquility. But when things tip one way or the other, in the case of our discussion when authority flexes its muscles in such a way as to strangle the common good, it becomes necessary for the people to voice their displeasure. That was the crux of the life and work of Emile Zola, a 19th century writer and intellectual who saw the inequities in his native France and wrote about them even though they were an embarrassment to the government officials and the military. His most long-lasting legacy was his involvement in the Dreyfus Affair, a major scandal in which top officials in France's military apparatus put their trust in an officer who turned out to be a traitor, but pushed blame on a young artillery officer, Alfred Dreyfus, just because he was Jewish. The movie deals with both the life of Emile Zola and the affair in question. But before we dig deeper, let's discuss the plot. Here we go. The movie takes place essentially in two parts. The first deals with the early life and career of Emile Zola, played by Paul Muni, an aspiring writer living in a drafty attic apartment with his friend, the post-impressionist painter Paul Cézanne. Zola's fiancée, played by Gloria Holden, gets him a job in a bookshop, but he is soon fired for writing the novel Confessions of Claude, a semi-autobiographical book that exposes the issues of poverty in France and the indifference of its government. The police are none too happy about this, and neither is his employer, who angrily shows him the door. This dismissal does not discourage him because he cannot turn himself away from the problems that he sees going on every day. Everything from unsafe mining conditions, to the inhuman degradation going on down at the river slum, to the corruption going on in the government and the military. Needless to say, he becomes a controversial figure within the halls of power, beginning with his novel Nana, which is propelled by a chance meeting with a streetwalker who's hiding in a pub during a police raid. The military isn't too happy with the success of Zola's next book, The Downfall, which chronicles the blunders at the top level that led to France's embarrassing defeat during the Franco-Prussian War. Others follow. He writes about conditions in the meat industry, consumerism, the pursuit of happiness, flaws inherent in personal genius, rural peasant life, a Cinderella story, poverty in the railway system, greed and capitalist excess, the struggles of science and nature, the collegiate system, and struggles with religious faith. In spite of the controversy over the subject matter, Zola's work makes him a hero to the common man, and a very wealthy man in the process. He marries his sweetheart and starts a family, and ultimately retires his pen, and with it, his ideals. His old friend Paul Cézanne comes briefly back into his life to express his disappointment that the fire in Zola's belly has gone out in the wake of his success. With that, he terminates their friendship. The film's second story begins with a possible military scandal thanks to an intercepted letter that was on its way to the German embassy in Paris that proved that someone in France's military apparatus had been working as a spy. Without any real investigation, and to spare themselves the public embarrassment, the few officials who know about the letter pin the blame on Alfred Dreyfus, a young 35-year-old artillery officer with a spotless record, and, the movie lightly suggests, was chosen to take the fall because he was Jewish. Without any real due process, Dreyfus is shamed in the press, relieved of his stripes, and railroaded to a life sentence on Devil's Island in French Guiana.
I'm innocent! I'm innocent! I'm innocent! I'm innocent! I am innocent!
Several years later, Colonel Picard, not that one, the new chief of intelligence, uncovered some vital evidence that proves that the real culprit was a man called Major Esterhazy, an infantryman who was part of the High Command's inner circle and also not a Jew. Picard's superiors, knowing that such an earthquake could doom them all, orders him to put a sock in it. And just to make sure that he doesn't become a problem, reassigns him to a remote post somewhere in Africa. With the French government dead set on never reopening or even allowing the Dreyfus case to be discussed, Dreyfus' wife Lucy, played by Gail Sondergaard, pleads with Zola to rattle the system to get her husband a new trial. But he is reluctant to interfere, not wanting to relinquish his life of quiet retirement. But his conscience is stirred once again, largely because he is reminded that his complacency is what destroyed Cezanne's faith in him. He publishes an open letter in the newspaper, the famous J'accuse, indicting the military brass of fraud and gross mishandling of justice. This scandalous time bomb makes him a hero to a few, but a pariah to most. Angry mobs form in the streets, decrying his accusations as a form of national blasphemy. Zola is brought to trial for libel, but the judge refuses to hear testimony about the Dreyfus case, even though it is central to it. He is found guilty and charged with a year in jail and a heavy fine. Rather than do time, however, he flees London to work on the case. The public outrage over the Dreyfus affair reaches epidemic levels, and cries for justice become worldwide. In the wake of this outcry, new members of the French government dig deeper into the case and eventually find him innocent of all charges. And the participants in the cover-up are either dismissed or commit suicide. Esterhazy, the traitor, flees the country. Dreyfus is released from jail. Zola comes back from Paris, and at the moment when he's about to put pen to paper to write a chronicle about the whole affair, dies of carbon monoxide poisoning thanks to a broken pipe in his study. The movie ends with Dreyfus being welcomed back and given a public ceremony where he is exonerated and returned to duty. I want to confess something here. I have a general knee-jerk dislike for most movie biopics, mainly because I've seen so many that just didn't work. Most are satisfied to either sponge clean the facts in an effort to present a tiresome long-form womb-to-tomb account of the subject's life, Nixon for example, or to whittle their life down to red-letter moments, as with The Iron Lady. What I like about the life of Emile Zola is the same thing that I liked about movies like Lincoln and Topsy-Turvy. The screenwriter picks one peak moment of their lives so that we get a glimpse of a singular moment in their greatness. It helps to keep the narrative clean and in many cases keeps the movie a bit shorter. With this story, the screenwriters tried to juggle some of the biographical stuff in the first half, showing how Zola became so influential, and then in the second half showing how that influence helped break down an immobile justice system that was stonewalling a grievous miscarriage of justice. And the director William Dieterle manages to keep things moving, creating an engaging film that gives us a clear idea of its subject, offers the things that motivate him, and then gives us a very effective idea of the case that he would be remembered for. Although I wouldn't change anything about the life of Emile Zola structurally, I always find myself more engaged with the Dreyfus affair than I do with the actual life of Emile Zola. That story is hard not to be engaged with, that of a good man who loves his family and his country and is undone by racism and a military staff populated by a flock of save-asses that would rather condemn a man to a prison sentence than admit that one of their own is a traitor. Dreyfus is played in a small but significant performance by Joseph Schildkraut. He won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for his performance. And the scenes in which he is arrested and then has his stripes torn from his uniform before being sent to a blockhouse on Devil's Island are really heartbreaking. They're matched by a wonderful scene later when he is exonerated and he's so excited to be going home that he keeps running in and out of his open cell. Paul Muni, meanwhile, did not win an Oscar for Best Actor for his performance as Emile Zola, and I think I may know why. He had just won the Oscar the previous year for playing the title role in The Story of Louis Pasteur, in which he played a bearded French intellectual, a man at the top of his profession, whose ideas and theories are balked at by the establishment. And in this movie, he plays a bearded French intellectual, a man at the top of his profession, whose ideas and theories are balked at by the establishment. It is a very similar performance. Now, that doesn't mean he's not good, it's just hard to watch both and not have a little deja vu. I like the movie quite a bit more than I expected to this time. It's engaging, and it feels a little less high school drama than the story of Louis Pasteur. It was nominated for a whopping 10 Academy Awards, winning not only Best Picture and Best Supporting Actor, but also an award for its screenplay. And yet, what the film is most remembered for today is a fault in its recounting of the Dreyfus affair. Dreyfus was Jewish, and it is well established that racism played a major part in the accusations that sent him to prison for 5 years. But the movie scrubs that fact almost completely from the screen, save for one moment in which the military officials look at his record. There is never a mention of this, and if you know anything about the Dreyfus affair, then this lands with a massive clang. It's been debated ever since exactly how and why racism was scrubbed from the final screenplay, but most agree it was Hollywood's fear of offending Hitler. This was a time before the United States had declared war on Germany, and at this moment the major studios were making a private pact to refrain from doing anything that might offend him. It was purely business, a matter of money. Germany was a significant source of revenue for American films, and it was thought that revenue might be cut off not only in Germany, but also in the countries the Nazis might invade in the future. In his book, The Collaboration, Hollywood's Pact with Hitler, which I read, author Ben Irwan notes that top executives in Hollywood were constantly at odds with Nazi censors in Germany, going back at least a decade to All Quiet on the Western Front. The moral aesthetic to this issue was always floating in the air, particularly since many of Hollywood's major studios were being run by their founders, European Jews who had immigrated to America at the turn of the century. But even though Hitler's regime was doing everything it could to exclude and enslave and ultimately exterminate Europe's Jewish population, there was the realization that money made from the European distribution was vital, especially since the United States was still dealing with the lingering effects of the Great Depression. Hitler's censors bristled when they learned that Warner Brothers was going to make a movie based around the Dreyfus affair, which, by its very nature, was sympathetic to Dreyfus since he was persecuted just because he was Jewish. Warner Brothers was ordered to remove the word Jew from the life of Emile Zola, and Irwan explains in his book that George Gissing, a German consul and member of the Nazi Party, who was stationed in Los Angeles, had often had a hand in reviewing scripts and making recommendations on films too critical of Germany or the party itself. The film originally had the word Jew in the dialogue, but due to Gissing's demands, they were removed. The only indication of racism present in the film is a brief sight of the word Jew on a document featuring Dreyfus' profile. The elimination of this fact doesn't destroy the film, but you can feel the timidity with which the executives at Warner Brothers handled this situation. And that's surprising because Warner Brothers was the most vocally opposed to Hitler long before the studios built up the nerve, defying his racist machinations long before the United States entered World War II. And when they did, their anti-Nazi sentiments were second to none. First was Confessions of a Nazi Spy, followed by Sergeant York, like Legion, and of course all those Looney Tunes. But despite this controversy, the life of Emile Zola was a huge success. The big question, of course, is, does it still hold up? Yes, absolutely. The structure of the film is somewhat odd given the filmmaking narratives at the time. It's evenly split between the early scenes that follow Zola from the beginning of his career up until his retirement, and the second half in which we follow the Dreyfus affair that Zola reluctantly agrees to help out with. And I was surprised watching the film this time how much I got caught up in all that courtroom stuff. A case like this, with many players and many plotters, might tend to become a rabble of characters and legal jargon, but it never does. It's actually really compelling because the Oscar-winning screenplay keeps the language clean and the narrative on focus. And they're backed by the emotional scenes of Dreyfus withering away in his cell, reminding us of Colonel Picquart's rejection of the burial of Dreyfus's innocence.
But you can't close the tomb over a living man.
I love that line. By 1937, the country had been through the roughest years of the Great Depression, burdened by the indifference and ineffectiveness of the Hoover administration. And then seen through the efforts of FDR's New Deal, a motivating effort of what the government owes the people in time of crisis. They saw in Zola's championship of the common man that when suffering and injustice buries truth, the idea of justice withers away. That message still stands even today, as many Americans are still struggling over the definition of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's a great story, it's a great message, and it's a great film. And I think it's a lot more engaging than probably any other film that was nominated that year for Best Picture. Here they are. We start off with a real firecracker, the great screwball comedy The Awful Truth, starring Cary Grant and Irene Dunne, whose marriage is on a 60-day holding pattern until their divorce becomes official. And as you might guess, it becomes a hilarious game of one-upmanship as one tries to spoil the other's romantic interest. Dunne wants to marry a hayseed played by Ralph Bellamy, and Grant gets hooked up with a dim-witted aristocrat played by Molly Lamont. The balance of power in this feud moves back and forth as they try to outdo one another. Do you think it'll lead to reconciliation? I'll let you find out. All I can say is that director Leo McCarey won a well-deserved Best Director Oscar, and Dunne and Bellamy both got nominations, but oddly enough, Grant got left out in the cold. In the bitterest misstep of Oscars history, Cary Grant never won a competitive Oscar, and had to settle for an honorary award in 1970. Cabin's Courageous, directed by Victor Fleming and based on the story by Rudyard Kipling, is a movie that, I'm going to confess, probably meant more to me when I was 12 years old than it does in my 50s. Although I still greatly admire the performance of Freddie Bartholomew as a spoiled rich brat who falls off the deck of a luxury steamship and is picked up by a fishing vessel, where he is made to work to earn his keep. His best friend is Manuel, a Portuguese sailor played by Spencer Tracy, in a role that won him the first of 2 back-to-back Oscars for Best Actor. He's very good in an out-of-character role for him, a man who is the film's emotional center. And yet, I have mixed feelings. Tracy in brownface feels a little uneasy, and I've always felt like he was a little miscast. He himself did everything in his power to get out of this movie, and he never played anything like it again. But there is a genuine joy in his performance. Dead End, directed by William Wyler and based on a successful stage play by Sidney Kingsley, tells the story of upper and lower classes in New York City, with the wealthy having moved to the newly built apartments that have stifled and crowded the poor into cramped ghettos. The movie is largely a tapestry of several characters whose lives intersect, including Joel McCrea as an aspiring architect, Humphrey Bogart as a small-time gangster, and Sylvia Sidney as a good girl from the neighborhood. But the centerpiece are these 6 kids, who were so popular with audiences that they became known as the Dead End Kids, and later the Bowery Boys, and made several successful films over 2 decades. For me, the movie is far too stagey. The drama seems a little forced, and a little of the Dead End Kid shenanigans goes a long way. It's not bad, it just makes its point and then repeats it several times. The Good Earth, directed by Sidney Franklin, is a lovely adaptation of Pearl S. Buck's classic novel that I read in high school, dealing with the fortunes and misfortunes of a family of Chinese peasants. Most presently, a married couple played by Paul Muni and Louise Reiner, who won her second Best Actress Oscar in a row. It's a striking visual production, but it is marred by yellowface, white actors playing Asian characters, which Irving Thalberg apparently defended by stating, "I'm in the business of creating illusions." Well, it's still cringeworthy. In Old Chicago, directed by Henry King, is a dusty old pioneer western all about Irish settlers setting up stakes in the future Windy City. It's boring, dated, and has a structure borrowed from Cimarron, that earlier Best Picture winner that I spotlighted a few episodes back. But nothing in this movie is nearly as interesting as the strange event that happened during that year's Oscars. Alice Brady picked up the year's Best Supporting Actress prize, but couldn't attend the ceremony because of a broken leg. During the presentation, when her name was called, an unknown man apparently came up to the podium, said thank you, and walked out with it, and was never seen again. When Brady called the Academy because she had not received it, it was revealed that the man was an imposter. Fortunately, she was rewarded with a replacement, but unfortunately she died 6 months later. Lost Horizon, directed by Frank Capra, who became a regular face at the Oscars in this decade, is a very odd fantasy adventure that is hard to talk about. Well, let me give you the setup. It begins with a foreign dignitary played by Ronald Colman who's caught up in a mass evacuation of a small city in China and ends up boarding a plane that he and the other passengers are unaware is being hijacked. Unaware until the plane runs out of fuel and is forced to land in the Himalayas, where Coleman and his companions find the lost city of Shangri-La, a place where no one ever ages and no one ever dies. Now, what happens there, I will leave for you to discover, but it's the ending that strikes a chord. This is a very strange movie that never goes where you expect it to, and ends on a note that I'm not totally sure I'm happy with. I mean, I found it captivating, but I was really conflicted on how I felt about it. Watch it and tell me what you think. 100 Men and a Girl, directed by Henry Coster, is not as spicy as the title might indicate. It's another Deanna Durbin confection. In this one, she plays the daughter of a failed musician who forms a symphony made up of his friends who are all out of work. The goal is to have them be conducted by Leopold Stokowski and hopefully land a contract. It's charming. The best I can say is that it's not the overbearing giggle box that Three Smart Girls was. I guess I enjoyed it okay, but truth be told, I kind of forgot about it. Stage Door, directed by Gregory LaCava, is a way better backstage dramedy, and that's likely because the cast is better and the plot isn't so canned. Its star power alone gives it a lot of juice, featuring no less than Katharine Hepburn, Ginger Rogers, Adolphe Menjou, Lucille Ball, Ann Miller, and Eve Arden, all in top form. The plot is loosely episodic, dealing with various character details about the rising and falling fortunes of a group of would-be actresses living together in a boarding house in New York City, all hoping to make it on Broadway. I don't even care about the plot. The casting alone makes this one a gem. Everyone is in top form. I just love watching these actresses play off of each other. Apparently behind the scenes there were some that didn't get along, but you couldn't tell by watching it. And finally, A Star is Born, directed by William Wellman, the first color film ever nominated for Best Picture, and the second of 5 adaptations of this story after 1932's What Price Hollywood. And it's the first movie that I ever watched on Wikipedia. The story you should know by now. Janet Gaynor plays Esther Blodgett, an aspiring actress whose mother and father despise the very idea of such thing. But her grandmother believes in her and gives her money to head out to Hollywood. She finds that she's not alone, with so many girls coming west looking for the same dream. But that starts to change when the kid on the way up meets an alcoholic actor, played by Friedrich March, who is on the way down thanks to a persistent love affair with the bottle. They get married, and the movie deals with how these two wayward souls deal with the pangs and poings and the ups and downs of show business. I like this movie, though my favorite is the Judy Garland version from 1954, although this one has a better ending. Out of these nominees, I think I would keep The Awful Truth, Stage Door, and A Star is Born. And yeah, I want to make a case for The Good Earth because of Louise Reiner's performance, but I'm held back by the whitewashing. My personal list of nominees would include 2 anti-Nazi pictures from Warner Brothers, They Won't Forget with Claude Rains and Lana Turner, and the aforementioned Black Legion starring Humphrey Bogart and Ann Sheridan. On the lighter side, 2 comedies, the Laurel and Hardy classic Way Out West and A Day at the Races, one of the lesser Marx Brothers confections, which I love mainly because it contains the most magical of Harpo's musical solos. Also Jean Renoir's French classic The Grand Illusion, one of my favorite movies of all time, dealing with the class relationships among a group of prisoners of war during World War I who are plotting to escape. My second favorite film of the year is Make Way for Tomorrow, an effective melodrama about an elderly couple who have to depend on their children when they become destitute. But I'd give them all up for my favorite movie of the year, and that has to be Walt Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. If the task given to the Academy membership is to select the film that shows the best work done by film artists in a 12-month period, then Snow White is a glittering example. The culmination of years of experimentation and work compiling new techniques of color and sound and movement and story. Just look at the striking imagery here and remember that this was the very first cell animated feature, and the first animated feature produced in the United States. The first of its kind didn't have to be this lush, this visually striking, but it shows the work of artists working at the top of their form. And this is what they came up with right out of the box. The Academy did not bestow the film with a Best Picture nomination, but instead began a trend that would endure until the Best Animated Feature category was created in 2002. That of having Disney features rewarded for their music while leaving their visual stylings out in the dust. In a rare move, the film was given a special award the following year for, and I quote, a significant screen innovation which has charmed millions and pioneered a new entertainment field. How's that not a fancy way of saying Best Picture? For Armchair Cinema, I'm Jerry Dean Roberts. I'll see you next time.